Hello, Holland. I'm Jaamil olawale Kosoko. It's a pleasure to welcome you. I'm doing this as a part of my role as a 2024 Curatorial Consultant with the Philly Fringe Festival. And I must say, you are an artist who and I don't say this, openly, but and about many, but you are an artist who really does exist rent free in my creative imagination. I think about your work, I follow your work, and it's really an immense honor to be in conversation with you on this platform.
For saying that. Oh my gosh.
Oh yeah. So Holland, I know you as an incredible multi-faceted artist. Your work really spans multiple genres. I understand that you're largely self-taught. Is that accurate?
Yeah, largely self-taught in that I didn't go through a conventional kind of school conservatory program. I grew up around singers. My mom and her sisters, they sang all the time. They actually had a singing group called MDLT Willis where they were signed to Joe Jackson's record label and would go on tour, opening for the Jackson Five. They even wrote songs for them to sing. I found out recently, I was talking to my aunt Maxine and she was like, oh yeah, they played at Madison Square Garden. I was like, what do you talk? How do you just, I'm 35 and you're telling me this now, you know? Just sometimes our elders, they just kind of pull out this like,
Yes.
you're like, what, you know? Um, so yeah, so they always sang, me and my cousins always sang. We were always really encouraged to perform, and kind of being involved in the arts was, luckily in our family just always really nurtured. My dad, he's kind of more of an engineer, but he always saw that me and my sister had these like creative sparks inside of us, and was always willing to support our creativity. So we're really lucky that we got to have that. But yeah, um, I grew up singing and was introduced to musicals like The Wiz
Mm, mm,
um, and like Annie, just all these kind of old musicals that like my mom and my aunts really loved. So that was sort of like my introduction into the world, was like theater and drama and like harmonizing together and singing together.
mm,
And so I think that having that introduction to the world just kind of helped inspire me to follow this passion that I had whenever I would sing, whenever I would listen to music and film soundtracks, and so I
mm,
think that was a huge blessing to kind of be a guiding light
mm.
for the path that I ended up creating to be an artist.
Oh, so beautiful. I mean, that's the best training, like home training.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, the thing, they're really supportive and they'll let you know if you're singing out of tune also. So,
Exactly. With love, right? It's
exactly.
love, it's with love.
Yeah, yeah, the love part you figure out later, but yeah, it was just always to encourage us to keep getting better. But yeah, for sure, with love. Yeah.
So beyond your family, who might you sort of accredit or understand as a part of your artistic lineage or your creative ancestors?
Hmm. You know, I think the clearest thing that I could identify, probably, I know it's really corny, but uh, probably the musicals that I watched as a kid, and also um, because I'm a kid of the 90s, and what happened a lot for kids of the 90s, parents just kind of like put their kids in front of a TV and then just sort of like let us figure it out, you know? So lots of like TV and film soundtracks. Um, uh, there were lots of kind of more musical cartoons when I was growing up. So I would also hear all these different voices and different characters all the time, and I was always really drawn to how how um, how people could use their voices in all these different ways to sound like instruments or to sound like characters or other aspects of themselves. Also because my family, they're so expressive, they would like be making fun of each other and doing impressions of each other all the time. Like that was also such a huge part. And in terms of like, you know, first artists that I started to recognize as doing something really different. When I was younger, for me, I think the first person I saw doing that was Bjork. I remember, actually, I remember first hearing about her because kids were like making fun of this like kind of very bizarre avant-garde public celebrity figure.
Mhm.
And then I was like,
Was it the swan, like the
yeah, literally, it was the
swan
Swan.
monarch?
It was the
Yeah.
Swan. And I think like that movie Dancer in the Dark came out. I didn't see that when I was younger, but I saw waited till later, thank God, to see
Yes.
that. But
Thank
just
God.
how kind of her uniqueness was at the time was kind of poked fun at. And so that's how I first was introduced to her, was her sort of being like this mocked entity. And then when I first found her music, it was like the first kind of big big belty singer making all these arrangements that were like things that I'd never heard of before, sounds that I'd never heard before. How she collaborated with other artists to make these really, really incredible tapestries of sound. I think that was the first introduction I had of like permission that you can go really far out
Mm.
with how you want to sing, with the music that you want to write. So that was the first introduction I had to that. Also, because I never learned any instruments other than, you know, in public school I learned the clarinet and the tenor saxophone, and then just sang in the like after school musical theater things that I did with my sister. So because I also never learned how to play like chord instruments, I also didn't really have an image of what it would be like for me to be a composer or musician or music artist. Like it was a pretty narrow path of examples that I had seen. And to a degree I internalized that. And so seeing her helped me just have an example of what it can look like outside of those more traditional forms. So that was, I think that was one of the biggest pivots in terms of what I could see as possibility when I was younger.
Would you say that sort of, I don't know, I don't want to concentrate too much on Bjork, but mostly just, mentioning how, you saw Bjork sort of being this sort of outlier and being made fun of. I'm trying to liken that or connect that to your previous identity under the moniker of like a villain. And,
Mhm.
perhaps there's a connection there. Maybe segueing into who you've become now as performing under Holland Andrews.
Yeah.
So yeah, could you maybe just speak to how like a villain emerged maybe and how you decided to sort of transition from that moniker?
Yeah, definitely. So Like a Villain came from the good old MySpace days
Okay.
where, you know, you had, if you wrote music, you would just post it on your little MySpace page. And I first started to write music on GarageBand, just layering my voice in clarinet and then kind of doing like what my version of production was in that time. Like I didn't really know anything about effects, or even I didn't plan to perform with my computer. It was just all, you know, recording my voice and then clarinet into these like layers in ways that felt really good to me. And um, I, I thought it was kind of ironic to call myself like a villain because I've just always felt like a really kind of polite person, and it gave me permission to be a little bit unpredictable with the sounds that I got to make. So for people who knew me and for that to be my name, I was really interested in that difference. And there is this like this protection that comes from having a moniker that I really loved, especially when I moved to Portland and I got to perform my first gig as like a villain. I think it was also a time too where solo artists having band names was pretty common. maybe more so now, and that's always going to be a trend that'll be changing. But I'll get to my reasons for going under my real name in a little bit. But I first played my first show when somebody had found my MySpace page and was listening to my music, and they asked me to play a gig. It was 2008 or 2009, and I had never played a show before. I didn't have any gear, and I just said, "Yeah, I'll do it."
Hmm.
And
I
I lived
love
in
that.
yeah, and I was like, okay, well, how am I going to figure this out? And at the time, I'd been living in Portland for a year. I'd moved there from Orange County, and I had most of my friends were dudes that played in like math rock bands and punk bands and hardcore bands, and those were the kinds of shows that I was going to also. So I was just asking my friends, like, what kind of gear should I get? And they said, you should get pedals. You should get a loop pedal, you should get a reverb pedal and delay. And based on what we've heard on your MySpace, maybe this can be a way that you can, that you can perform. And it felt too daunting to also learn how to perform live with my computer. So I thought, okay, that's great. I'll learn how to use these pedals. And I bought some and then got an amp and then just started to practice in my friend's basement for hours and hours and hours and started to develop my first set of music for the show. And Like a Villain was the name that I was using on MySpace, and then it just carried over to the rest of the performances that I did. So that was sort of like the beginning of that that part of my life, kind of going from it just being a recording experiment into a live, like a live concert playing entity. And I just loved doing it so much. And luckily, like my first live show ever that I played, the room was packed. I remember I got paid $82, and I'm like, I'm rich. This is what you're doing? This is what happens when you play shows? Yeah, I'm gonna keep doing this. And of course, the longer I toured, I saw that that wasn't what I
Exactly that part.
yeah, yeah. I'm like, I think the second show that I played was like some dive bar, and I was like, oh, it's not. Okay, there's levels to how these concerts can go.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, and so that just became just such a huge part of my life, performing under that name. And also in Portland, it was kind of nice to have people recognize me and to know me as the way that they had seen me perform, and not with not under my name. That's just felt really safe to me. Um, every once in a while too, there can be this like kind of if people really like what you make, sometimes there can be an attempt to like cross your personal boundaries. And I think I noticed that maybe more so in the past than I do now. But so having that layer of protection was really nice. And the change really started to happen when I performed under my name when I moved to New York. Most of my kind of visibility in the world was on the West Coast and touring, and I would do one-off gigs here and there as like a villain in Europe or in other parts of the world. But when I moved to New York, it just seemed like it was time to have the multitudes of things that I was doing just all be to allow my name to contain all those things. And also this part is very important as to the timing of when I made that change. Is I was right at this point where I just started working with a manager, and I was thinking about starting to perform under my name. People had suggested it to me, but I was really attached to this kind of layer of protection of having a stage name. And then I noticed that I started getting tagged in events that I wasn't playing. And I thought, what's going on? And then there was a band in Phoenix, Arizona, who started to use the name Like a Villain. And they're a metal band. And so I had, people who knew my music in Phoenix, like send me messages saying like, hey, are you playing this like metal garage show in Phoenix? Like, I'm kind of confused. And I was like, no. And so I reached out to the band, and if you would look up Like a Villain, it is likely that I'm going to be one of the first names that would pop up. And so I reached out to them. I said, hey, I get that this is a cool name. Maybe there's something that you can do to create more distinction between the two of us. And they didn't do that, and then they ended up copywriting the name, which I'd never done despite
Oh,
performing live under it for, you know, 10
several
years.
years, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
So, so yeah, and I could have put in the effort to fight it, but I just didn't really. It was kind of like COVID time, very beginning of COVID time, and it just didn't really seem. I didn't feel a lot of like passion and momentum to fight for the name because it felt like the the time for me to start performing under my birth name. Um, so I think it simplified a lot of things, and it it's also it can also be tricky when you're an artist that does so many things, like for people to know how to categorize me, and that's a complexity that I'm fine with living with. I think however people find me in whatever context, that's how I can live in their minds, and that's really cool. Um, but the timing of when I went from Like a Villain to Holland Andrews was because of this other band, and it was also ideas that were percolating in my mind. But I have so much gratitude for that time when I was using that name. There's a lot of wisdom that I had when I was performing under that stage name that I try to um, hold on to. A lot of that work was more like kind of song based, and more recently, I've been kind of like more playing in this like sprawling experimental sonic world with like moments of recognizability, and but I really but I there are parts that I'm trying to channel that like that old Like a Villain energy that I took so long to to hone and develop. But yeah, that's the story about how I went from Like a Villain to just being Holland Andrews.
I really appreciate how you just so seamlessly stepped, like found your truth on the stage. You're just
Mm,
like, oh yeah, this is a natural part of my evolution, Was there any fear in there? And if
mm.
so, how did you sort of use that maybe to maybe push the vision forward?
Yeah. Well, luckily, I had experience performing when my dad would put me and my sister in these like musical theater summer camps,
Oh,
because we'd be singing with our
we're
cousins.
ready.
Yes,
Okay.
we like I knew what upstage was, I knew what downstage was, I knew how to dance and sing in an ensemble. Not that I was good at it, but I knew how to do it. And it was instead of like soccer summer camp, my dad just put us in, musical theater summer camp. So I had developed a comfort with performing and being on stage, but also what I love about performing, and especially what I started to unconsciously put together as a kid when I was on stage, was that it gives me permission to feel big feelings
Mm,
and a time for when I'm supposed to feel those big feelings.
mm,
Where as a kid, I had a lot of big feelings because of different things that I was experiencing, and not really knowing the permission or timing to feel those things because there was so much going on.
mm,
So, something about performing, about acting, about getting to a kind of peak emotional moment that there's nowhere else to go except sing, felt just like such a cathartic release and a deep understanding of myself and my own interior world, and sort of just gave me a frame for for my emotional self. And I think later on started to discover also my spiritual self.
mm.
So I think that was something that I was putting together when I was a kid, and I still feel that way when I perform. But it doesn't mean that there's not fear.
Of
I
course.
still like, I can sometimes I can create the stakes around a performance, and I can make them feel so high that I can get really, really scared before performing. Um, uh, which I think I'm just trying to be a little bit easier on myself within that
Yes.
process as well. Especially when like it becomes your livelihood.
Exactly.
Um, but I'm just trying to anchor in the trust that everything is going to work out in the best way for me and everybody involved.
Mm.
Um, that's a journey. Um, but yeah, so I think really having um, performance as a space to feel permission for all of my feelings makes performing a really safe place for me to be and to express myself. So I think that helps with any other kind of lingering fears that there could be.
And you should know, I'm sure you do, but if you haven't been told recently, I think the vehicle that you drive and allow us all to like hop aboard allows us to hone, to express, to channel those interiorities. So that vessel isn't only opening up for yourself, but it really is opening up for the community that is partaking in the work. And yeah, I just wanted to say that
Thank
because
you.
it's incredibly special what you do. As you mentioned, you know, you do so many beautiful things. And I'm just curious, how do you, you know, how does your creative approach differ from, you know, say collaborating with a theater artist versus a dance maker versus a film project? Uh,
Mhm.
or not so much. Maybe you
Mhm.
can talk about that a bit.
Yeah. It's so different depending on what it is. I'll start talking about with film because that's a newer place of creative play for me. Even though the music that I've written has always felt really cinematic, I think because of like some of my earlier influences and all these big feelings that I have, that it just like kind of comes out in this like feeling almost like imagery, and like a somatic story, but just with tones and textures. But with film is really interesting because um, maybe it's not like this for every film composer, but it's been this way for me, where there's so much like trial and error of ideas for
Mm,
scenes and getting to know a director and what when they're describing kind of what they're looking for in some of the temp music that they're using or in certain specific parts of the story. There's a lot of trying to find the right sort of like tone or frequency that matches the moment. And for me, it can take me a while to find that in the right way. Um, and that is also really precious learning for me because it helps me to deepen the process of just like not this, okay, something else, not this, okay, something else, not this, okay, something else, and trying not to get as attached to the rejection of an idea and trying to find excitement like, okay, it wasn't this but it's something else, like let's try to find it. So that's turned into a really beautiful practice that I can apply to when I'm working with a choreographer, with a theater maker, to not be so precious about the idea. And also in the things that don't end up getting used, I can find inspiration for my own work, for when I'm working with someone else, and just kind of like creating a big kind of library or Rolodex of potentials.
mm,
So that's something that's been really exciting in working in film. Every single choreographer also that I've worked with has been so different from each other. Like a dear friend of mine, Dorothée Munyaneza, a French Rwandan choreographer who I met in 2016 when I did the Creative Exchange Lab. Um, that was the first time where I was composing music for a theater and dance piece, and just started to tour the world with this show that we were making. And the content of the show was so intense. I don't want to get into it in the interview, but just imagine some of the worst things that you can do to, women in times of war. That's what this show
mm,
was about. And so we were diving so deeply into these like really atrocious stories and just kind of pulling this, pulling these like, pulling these sounds out of me,
mm,
um, kind of in a way to where with theater, you can get information through words, through movement. And I think because that particular show was so intense, people can come in with blocks to not want to receive it because it's so painful. But the way that music can just cut through any of those blocks to still be able to feel the story, it's a really unique kind of vibration that can penetrate, literally penetrate your body. So that was its own like incredibly unique experience. I worked with choreographer Bill T. Jones, and that's another situation where it's like, let's try something else, let's try something else, let's try something else, and just really like finding a foundation in myself to allow just the channel to be open enough to just be in this play place.
Mm, mm,
And yeah, and then also working with Moya. Moya is just also the sweetest person, and that show is filled with so much heart and so much spirit and just deep ancestral
mm,
love and care. That
mm,
and also the collaboration with her and how we were all doing movement together. Um, inspires a sort of like embodiment in how I'm going to be composing for that piece. Um, and I'm working with Will Rawls. We premiered a piece called Sicker, and that's a whole other, that's just like, that's just so fun and so fucking weird, because Will is so weird and I love him so much. And the cast, we just like really became a family in developing that together. And like we started working on that piece actually in 2019 and then premiered it in 2023. So it was sort of like this legacy of us building this piece together, and so much of who we are changed in the development of it. Um, and even my tastes as an artist started to change in the developing of it. So it's also interesting how time can be its own kind of like collaborator as well. Um, yeah,
mm.
so those are, I think I answered your question.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
And now
yeah,
you're coming to Philly.
now I'm kind of Philly.
Are you
Yeah.
coming to Philly? And you're bringing, this is a solo performance, yes?
Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about what, the audiences should expect?
So I'm thinking like the first night, I'm thinking of it almost like a villain and then Holland Andrews, but both of them are Holland Andrews, but like how I would perform in my musical practice as like a villain, um, and now are so different, but I still really, really love the music from when I perform like a villain. Like there's something about just having a set of songs that you just hit and you know how to do it and then you know how to play inside of it,
Mm,
that I really miss from those days, versus now where I feel like I get to be really expansive in my improvisation practice. That's also a way that I like to express myself in music and with other musicians, is to play with different people, generate ideas out of thin air. Um, and but inside of like a frame also. So I'll also be bringing in some elements of this piece that I did at the Whitney, um, and that was a part of the biennial where I made a sound installation in the stairwell of the Whitney Biennial. And for the performance that I did as part of the biennial, I was integrating all these different sounds and textures from the installation and then performing along with them, in addition to generating more material live along with it, with improvisation, with set lyrics. So it sort of felt like a new set of material based on this installation music. And I did 3 performances for that biennial, and each night was so different. And each time I do anything, it's going to be
yeah.
different from the time that I did it before, which feels really fun. Um, so yeah, some of the things that you'll be hearing are lots of experimental vocalizations. I love to make my voice sound like different instruments. I love to sing very theatrically, very operatically. I really love to make bird sounds, and also for both nights, and how I love to perform in general is like by highlighting the um, the ease that can come after after experiencing profound dissonance.
Mhm,
Um, and healing is a very important part of how I like to feel my work when I'm embodying it.
mhm,
And for me, that means acknowledging the pain that exists in order for healing to even feel necessary.
mhm,
For that friction, for when the floodgates open, to just be able to surrender into the cathartic release of beauty. Um, so these are some things that I'm going to be showcasing for these performances.
beautiful. And I guess just my final question, so if we're, say we're time traveling, we're time travelers here, all right? So bear with me. We're time traveling. We're moving, let's say, 10 years into the future. Um, where are you? What do you smell? What are you sort of excited about? Yeah.
Yeah, I feel a lot of excitement around having a healthy, beautiful, loving family with my wife. We're beginning our baby process once we both come home from Portugal. So that is, honestly, truly the biggest piece that I'm excited about. I also love thinking about my practice um, growing into this the art space because it requires me to make something and to allow the work to still live in a live place that you get to experience, but I don't need to physically be there in order for that to be happening, which I think can also be really exciting and helpful for being a parent. Um, so more sound installations, more records being released, but just to serve as a vessel for um, just to like kind of track the expression of my spirit through time, um, without any sort of attachment to like how well an album does or anything. I never really see myself as like necessarily a recording artist, but someone who facilitates just different kinds of experiences with sound. And um, I hope for an expansion of wisdom that looks like the letting go of things that don't serve me anymore, uh, and feeling more free in my body, more free in my voice. These voices of um, these voices of doubt that came from like what I've heard other people say about what I'm allowed to do, what I'm not allowed to do, how I've internalized um, uh, just any sort of colonial idea around success, around happiness, around who I get to be. In the future, I kind of hope for the disintegration of of those ideas,
Mhm,
and for that to become composted for this for new beauty to be emerging, and then hopefully um, you know it'll hopefully be a really full garden if it's going to be 10 years from now. And then along with that there's going to be new problems that I'll be facing, and um, I hope that whatever they are, I'll feel equipped to be able to handle them, um, with my wife, with my community, with my family, um, yeah, with any other kinds of resources that I can't really identify right now, but I hope that they'll all be waiting for me in the future. And hopefully we'll still be in New York, but
okay.
life is long. Yeah, that's what I see.
Beautiful. I see you having like moved to the country by that point. I don't know.
Yeah,
Maybe, I don't know. That's just a feeling I have.
yeah, maybe upstate. Who knows? That's the dream. That's the dream. That's the dream. That'd
Beautiful,
be ideal.
beautiful,
It should be like a
beautiful.
shed where I can scream as loud as I want. No one can
Exactly,
say
right?
about it. Then
You know, I feel like you need like sprawling like mountains or like greenery, just to let the echo for the echo,
for the
for the
echo.
reverberation.
Yes, I need the space. That is true. I think that's what that was in the vision, but you felt it in just the description of you felt the space in the words that I was
Okay.
saying,
Yes.
and then you just brought it out. Yeah.
Oh, Hala, what a pleasure. Thank you so much. Ashe, Ashe, let it be. It
Mm,
already is.
yeah.
And yeah, please enjoy your residency. Thank you for making some time to chat and connect around your performance, your life, your art, your work, your history. Um, yeah, may there be more opportunities to cross paths in the future.
Yes, I love that. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Jamil, for facilitating this conversation, asking me these beautiful questions and all of your affirmations. I really feel so deeply just the things that you shared about how the work that I've done has made you feel. That just really like, I really do feel that. I really, really do. Thank you so much.
Oh yeah, 100. 100. All right, Holland. Thank you, and thank you all.